Hello. Whether you've taken on a new plot or you have some space in your existing garden, I'm going to tell you about some vegetable seeds you can sow now and harvest in just a few weeks. I'm Liz Zorab and this is Byther Farm. There are 20 beds in this garden. Each of them are 12 feet long, it's 3.6 metres, and each one of them is a polyculture. So I'm growing multiple different types of plants in so that they complement each other. So I'm making the best use of the space in height and in spread and in depth of the soil. And there are some spaces in every single bed. And I want to share with you which seeds I'm going to be planting so that I can have a harvest from them before the first frosts. So bed number 1 has got sweet corn and some squashes in it, some nasturtium at that end, some chard and fennel, and I've also scattered in it some seeds of salsify, which is a root vegetable. I actually grow it because I love the flowers of it, but we may get around to eating it this year as well, which would be good fun. I can also see some carrots coming up where previously I've sown a row of, and I think they were yellow carrots across the edge there. So I'm going to start by sowing some radishes. These are really quick, 3 to 5 weeks, and you can be pulling these out of the ground. I have got 2 varieties. One is called Cherry Bell, which does a little round radish, and I really like the taste of that one. And the other one is called Flamboyant 3, which looks like a French breakfast radish to me. So it's a long thin one with a white end. So I'm going to look where my spaces are, and I think I've got a nice space here. I'm just going to make a row with my fingers and sow a few of the Cherry Bell radish. I'm trying to sow them quite thinly so that I don't have to thin these plants out at a later date. So that's one row, and I'll put a second row in here. Now, as with many of these plants, they do prefer a good amount of sunshine, and they're going to be growing in the shade of the corn and the squash. So they might be a bit slower to grow. I've just split the packet. Thank you, Bumblebee. Or they might not grow quite as large. And I have sown accidentally some seeds on the floor, so we'll see what happens there. These bumblebees are very happy. Bed number 2 is almost divided into 2. All the way down this side, I've got thyme. It smells fantastic. We're really enjoying using this in the kitchen, and it's got plenty of calendula in it. But the main vegetable in here is sweet corn. Now, I don't know why, but these corn really aren't doing very well. I'm guessing they will catch up eventually, but they are being quite slow, and they're much smaller than the ones in bed 1 or especially in bed 3. Along the edge there, I've put in some chard and also some red kale. I grow it almost as an ornamental, but also to support our local wildlife. And there are also some nursery strips of leeks in this bed, so they'll get moved to their permanent place soon. So I think what I'm going to do is, over at that end, I'm going to sow some perilla, shiso, which is a spicy leaf. It's often used in fusion cooking, and will be ready in 6 to 8 weeks. I've also added it in very small amounts to salads. It's quite strong when I do that, but it does pep up a salad quite nicely in very, very small amounts. So I'm going to make diagonal lines, and I'm only doing this on the diagonal so that it's a bit more interesting. And a few seeds. So rather than tipping the packet over the soil, I put a few seeds into my hand, and then using a finger and thumb, transfer them into the ground. There we go. And then seal up the packet really carefully so that they don't go everywhere. Bed number 3 has already got so much growing in it that I'm kind of not tempted to add anything else because I just think it'll be too much competition. So we've got these lovely sweet corn, which are starting to do their thing. I'm very happy about that. And then below the sweet corn, there are a lot of perennial flowers and some herbs. So at this end, I've got some more thyme in flower, looking very lovely. And also this monarda, which is bee balm. And round on this side, there are a couple of black kale, so Cavolo Nero kale. They are going to grow tall. The bottom leaves have been host to some slugs, but we can start harvesting these now and include them in our meals. Hooray! Bed number 4 needs a lot of attention. This whole area has been full of lupins that have really got hammered by lupin aphid. So after they had produced some flowers, I've now cut them right down to the ground. It looks vicious, it looks harsh. They're going to regrow quite happily. There are 6 really big lupins here. I'm going to lift 5 of them and move them to elsewhere in the garden, and then water this bed really thoroughly and give it a really good deep mulch. There will then be lots of space to plant in. I'm going to put in several fast growing crops. So a couple of different types of kale, but in particular my favourite is a red Russian kale, to grow as a salad leaf or as a very young leaf. By the time they're 7 or 8 inches tall, I'm kind of not interested in them, and I'll cut them back to get a flush of new growth. You can cut them back about 3 to 4 times and they'll send up new leaves, and you can just keep on harvesting those. So they're really good value for the amount of space they take up. And also in this bed, I've got some monarda and these onions. These are Welsh onions. They're perennials. I absolutely love them. I harvest them by just taking the leaves like this and chopping the leaf. This is plenty strong enough for me. And every few weeks I come and gather a whole load of these, chop them up, freeze them for use during the winter. And so the other seeds that I'm going to sow in here, along with some kale for baby leaves, is spinach, again for baby leaves. So I could be harvesting that in as little as 3 weeks, probably 3 to 5. Spinach varieties I'm sowing are giant winter spinach and also perpetual, for no other reason than those are the ones we have, and because I'm not expecting them to grow to full size, I'll just be harvesting smaller leaves. It doesn't really matter which variety it is. And then also some salad leaves, so something like a salad bowl or a lollo rosso, or even a mixed leaf mixture, and I'll again be looking at those as baby leaves rather than big hearting lettuces. At this end of bed number 4, there are some Welsh onions, red curly kale, and then this, which is sweet Sicily. It produces beautiful tiny white flowers in flat heads, which the pollinators love, and then produce these lovely seeds. Now, although I'm going to be collecting these seeds, I'm not keeping them inside. I am going to be scattering them straight onto the ground, because sweet Sicily needs a period in the cold. It needs vernalisation to trigger the seeds to grow, and although I've tried growing them after keeping them in the fridge, I find the very best way is literally just to scatter the seeds on the ground and wait until next year. Bed number 8 is a covered brassica bed, so I've got butterfly netting stretched over MDPE piping, which is pushed into the ground. The holes are big enough to allow pollinators through for the flowers, but not so big that the butterflies can get through and get at the brassicas, although it does look like there's plenty of slug activity going on in there instead. There's some space here, and in that I'm going to sow some kohlrabi. I've got 2 different colours, one called Purple Delicacy and is purple, and one called Green Delicacy and is green. I've only grown kohlrabi once before and I wasn't 100% taken with it, but I suspect that might be how I served it in the kitchen rather than anything wrong with it. So I'm going to give it another go, and I'm particularly interested to see if the purple delicacy variety tastes any different. Now, we've been very lucky and we've had quite a lot of rain in the last couple of weeks, but if your site hasn't had any rain for a while, make sure that your soil is reasonably moist when you're sowing your seeds. And I prefer to put my seeds into moist soil and then give them a very light watering afterwards than give them a heavy watering, which risks washing the seeds away everywhere. I really don't think I'm going to need very many seeds. From recollection, they had a pretty good germination rate. So I'm sowing 1 to 2 seeds about 2 to 3 inches apart. I think that will be plenty. They grew quite large, quite rapidly when I grew them before. And then my second row, a slightly longer row, is going to be the purple delicacy, kohlrabi. Here we go. And just cover those over. So when I make a drill in the ground, I like to just use my hand to make that, so I can kind of feel how deep it's getting. And then when I've sown the seeds, I cover it over by literally just doing this motion along the ground to pull the soil back over that drill. There we go, and I'm just making sure that the netting is tucked down again. Bed 7 looks like it is so full it couldn't possibly take any more plants. At the far end there's some skirret and parsley and also a courgette, zucchini. And that's a variety called Genovese. There's borage and chives on that side, and then some flowers here. There's what I think is a calabrese, which should give us a harvest during the summer. And at that end is a purple sprouting broccoli, which will give us a harvest next spring. And then in this middle section, planted on the diagonal, I have alternate rows of little gem lettuce and rutabaga or swede. And a couple of these little gem lettuces are now ready to harvest. I like to eat these not as a salad, but to take the plant, cut it down the middle, and then have the 2 halves, put them into a frying pan, a skillet, and sear them, heat them till they're slightly wilted and warmed, and then just serve them as a warm vegetable. So it'll only be a few weeks before all of these little gem lettuces are out, and there will be some gaps in this bed. However, quite a long time ago, I sowed some beetroot seeds, and I can see that a few of them are starting to come up. I have no idea why it has taken so long for them to germinate. So I can see there are a few there, in which case, rather than putting in anything that's going to take up space in the soil with like a root vegetable, I'm going to sow something that takes up space up here and is airy and light. So I'm going to sow some dill. I really like dill. It's a great herb, and it's really pretty, and the insect life like the flowers. It may just get to the flowering stage before the frosts arrive, but in the meantime we'll have that lovely fragrant herb to use. And I'm not being too worried about putting this in straight lines, because it's going to take up a different space to the rutabaga. It'll be taking up this air space rather than a huge amount of ground space. The leaves are light and fluffy, and so won't be blocking out very much light. In this corner of the bed is a perennial kale, and I think it's a type of Dorbenton's kale called Chantilly because it has variegated leaves. It's looking pretty grotty at the moment, so I'm going to cut it back hard and let all those lovely new leaves come through, and then I can harvest the baby leaves either to add to a salad or as a hot vegetable dish. Bed number 6 is chock-a-block full at the moment. It's got some bronze fennel at the end here, which I use in lots and lots of dishes. It's got some flowers. In the centre here is broccoli, well, calabrese, so those big flat heads that you buy in the supermarket. Won't be too many weeks before they're out, and there'll be some extra space there. And one of the things I planned to sow in here was spring onions, but I have just noticed that my chive plant, which has already flowered once this year, has obviously produced lots of seeds, because there are lots of chive seedlings on the ground already. And so I think for the onion family, that's probably enough in this bed. And I'll think about putting something else in here. Something like cilantro or coriander could go in here. And another thing that you can sow, which I did a few weeks ago and are now ready to go into the ground, is chard. And this is a 5-colour chard. This one's pink and there's some yellow ones. And I've put all the others in the garden already. But I will add these to this bed, just like that. And as they grow and mature, they will take the place of the calabrese when that's harvested. So don't worry if you didn't already have them sown. There's plenty of time to sow those now. And the great thing about chard is that unless you've had a really, really heavy frost, you're going to be able to carry on harvesting that right through to next spring. Along the front of bed number 6, some red curly kale and marjoram. There are flowers along here and ornamental grasses. And then back here there's some monarda and skewett, which has gone to flower, but that's absolutely fine. It's a root vegetable and I will be harvesting the roots this autumn. Bed 5 is about 50% calendula, and then at that end they're interplanted with sunflowers. Now these are short sunflowers, they won't get too tall. I want them short because it's a windy site. And then at this end, again, I've netted, and in here is purple sprouting broccoli, which we won't be harvesting until somewhere between December and March. And that leaves me a lot of space in between those plants to put in some fast growing crops, and I'm going to put in some fast growing brassicas so they're also protected by the butterfly netting. Here we go. So once again on the diagonal, just because that's my whim this year. And this is a Chinese kale, kaleane. I think that's how you say it. And it says on the packet, can be sown all through the growing season. Fast growing, matures in just 60 days from transplanting. Well, I'm not going to be transplanting, I'm direct sowing. So let's work on maybe 80 days or something like that. And we'll go a couple of rows of this. And it says you can use the flowering stems and buds in salads or in stir fries. And then in these other rows, I'm putting in some turnip called Snowball. It's a white one, which you get from the name. And I do actually really like this one. And although I haven't put in a row, I'm just going to freely scatter a few more seeds. I'm actually only doing 1 or 2 at a time. There we go. Bed number 9 has strawberries, fennel, chives, monarda and Asturian tree cabbage in it. It also has an abundance of weeds, which as yet still haven't got to. That is one of my priorities over the next couple of weeks. But bed number 10 is looking great. So it's edged with parsley, and then I've put in some red beet leaves. You can sow those now. These are very tiny plants that I sowed about 4 weeks ago, but you can still get them in to harvest the young leaves. And then at this end there is some Cavallonero kale and some lettuce, and then tucked here behind this lupin is a purple sprouting broccoli. Will be there for next spring. And at this end we've got some, look at these lovely lettuces. Do you know, they remind me of swimming hats from the 1960s and 70s when women wore a rubber swimming cap that usually had flowers and things on it. Looks like one of those. And then some more of the Salanova lettuce, a red curly kale, and what I think is probably a purple sprouting broccoli, but it could be sprouts. I can't remember which it is, and either way it's not looking terribly good. It's not looking terribly healthy. And then over in the corner is some flat leaf parsley. But these lettuces will be out. I'm going to harvest these whole and serve them as like a huge salad, maybe over a couple of days. But it will leave some space here, so I could sow some additional seeds here. And I've chosen 2 things to go into this space. So when I harvest the lettuce, I'm not going to pull it up, I'm just going to cut it off at the stem and leave the roots in the ground. So there'll then be lots of extra space. But I'm going to sow 2 different types of beetroot and also some cultivated rocket. Now, you could use wild rocket. I prefer the softer, gentler taste of the salad or cultivated rocket. So here we go for, I'm going to do arcs. I'm going to sow in arcs this time, for no other reason than I can. So this is a golden beetroot. I've actually got some of these I'm about to harvest, which I'm quite excited about, that I sowed much earlier in the year. But with beets or beetroot, you can eat the young leaves, or you can allow the plants to grow a little bigger and harvest baby beets. And I'll be sowing more beetroot seeds in September so that I've got young leaves and baby beets to go right through the winter and early spring. But for now, these are chioggia seeds. So this is beetroot with pink and white concentric circles, and when you cut through it, it's very pretty and I like the taste of it. But I've now got more seeds in my hand than I've got space for, so they will have to go somewhere else in the garden. And also a tiny bit of rocket. I'm actually going to put this very thinly in the same drills as the beetroot. There we go. And then cover them over. Our soil is still quite moist here from the rain we had last night. And all the seeds I've sown will need a watering. But I know that there is rain due in a couple of hours, so I will wait until this evening, see how the ground is looking, because after a few hours of rain they may well not need me to come out and water again. And here in bed number 11, I always get asked what this flower is. Joined by a bee. This is Nautia, I don't know how to say it, but it's spelt Knautia. Nautia, one of those things. It's really pretty, and it just, as long as you keep deadheading it, it blooms and blooms and blooms all summer. So down here I've got an Asturian tree cabbage. It's very small, very young, and in here is another calabrese, and then some marjoram. So this isn't oregano, it's marjoram, which is a softer leaf. It's slightly less hardy, and it's a slightly milder taste. Very similar in taste to oregano, and in recipes they're pretty much interchangeable. Then there's another calabrese here, and again here, and in the front there is a red curly kale and some more lettuce. So this bed actually looks pretty full, except for a little piece just down the front there. I don't want to plant anything by the Asturian tree cabbage because that's going to get quite big quite soon. But maybe I'll just pop in those last few chioggia beetroot seeds, because they can be growing underneath the leaves of the cabbage. And here in bed number 12, I have got climbing beans. So at that end there are borlotti beans, and I'm really pleased to say they are actually producing beans. I can see beans coming. That's exciting. And at this end is a yellow bean whose name I can't remember, but I will put it on the screen for you. In front of that is a row of red chard. Again, you can sow chard now. I'm actually growing this to be able to harvest the stems during the winter, but I can also harvest a few of the baby leaves for salads now if I want to. On the other side of the beans, it feels like a whole completely different bed around here. There's a blue Hubbard squash and a red Brussels sprout, so it will produce actually purple Brussels sprouts. And then across the middle of the bed are alternately sprouts and purple sprouting broccoli. And I have put in a couple of little baby squashes that I should have planted much sooner, so I don't actually know if they'll do anything, but it's worth a try. But there is still potentially some space here, and the soil is quite deep on this lower part of the bed, so I might just pop in a few carrots. I'm broadcasting these, so I'm just scattering them across the area. Now with carrot seeds, you really need to ensure that they don't dry out during germination. The soil is already quite moist, so I'm going to pop a piece of cardboard across it with a stone on top for a few days just to ensure that they don't dry out, and hopefully it won't be long before we see young carrots appearing. Bed number 13 is one of my favourites. It has agastache and a white monarda. Look how pretty this is, and against the agastache, I think it's just beautiful. Anyway, under there is some lettuce, and some carrot seedlings just coming up, where I sowed those about 2.5, maybe 3 weeks ago. At the front are some chives and also some celeriac. I'm not going to add anything else to this bed. There's not a huge depth of compost in it, and it's already got quite a lot of plants in it for the amount of space there is. Put that back there. And then bed number 14 is packed again. I've got some flowers in here, but then chives and a courgette, which is finally producing some, and that is a variety called zucchini. It's beautiful red, monarda, it's a really striking colour. This is parsley, that is, it's flowered and it's now going to seed, and I have my secateurs with me to cut this back. At the front is a lemon thyme. Let's create a little bit of space. Now, I'm not pulling the parsley out, I am just cutting the stems off it. It may well rejuvenate, it might not, but it's worth a try. And you can also sow parsley seeds now for a harvest of young leaves, which I like to chop and freeze in a container, so I have it for use right through the winter. And then here I have a Jerusalem artichoke, but this is a dwarf variety, so it only grows to about 3 feet high before it flowers. I planted it in spring last year. Someone had given me one piece to grow on, so this year I'll harvest the tubers, plant them into a different bed and have a full bed of them. And on the far side of this bed I've planted a fennel. Just like dill and coriander, you can sow seeds of bronze fennel now. On bed 15 I've got the peas that I sowed early in the year. They are now producing the most delicious sweet little peas. They're not getting as far as the kitchen, and I'm just dropping the empty pods onto the path and they can just break down there. So you can sow some peas now. I'm going to sow some peas in pots, and when I've taken these plants down, which won't be too long, I'll refresh the compost along there, plant the new pots of peas in. They don't really like root disturbance, but I'm going to risk it. And if nothing else, I'll have plenty of pea shoots, which to me taste just as good as, if not better than, peas themselves. At this end of the bed, hiding under all this rhubarb, is some more celeriac. There's 3 celeriac plants there, maybe 4. This rhubarb is timpani early, and really by the end of this month I will have finished pulling from it. It produces these beautiful red stalks. I do really like rhubarb. And a quick reminder, as I always say, rhubarb leaves are poisonous, so don't eat those. There's another timpani early there, and in between I've got some beetroot. Here is cylindra, so there's a long thin beetroot. It's nearly ready to harvest, and if you just want baby beetroot, it's absolutely ready. I'm going to let it grow a little bit bigger because I have a lot of uses for beetroot, and in an upcoming video I'll be telling you some of the things that I use beetroot for. In the middle here is a small brassica. Can't even remember what I've put in there, but maybe it's a Brussels sprout. There's some yak on here. So the only thing I'm going to be adding to this bed is some more peas for the pea shoots. And around here on bed 16, at this end, I have a pot of onions which have gone to flower. I actually put these in the pot last spring, and I am growing them for their beautiful flowers for the wildlife. I've got 3 huge, look how huge the leaves are on this. So this is Victoria rhubarb, and there's one just here called Sutton seedless. I haven't harvested any of the Sutton seedless yet because it's still very small. I only had one small crown of it, so I'm letting that grow for a while. And under here I have got 2 very lovely cabbages. I think these are both greyhound cabbages. They're enjoying growing in the shade. They've actually got not too much damage. I'm surprised the butterflies don't seem to have found them. Some slugs have. I'm just going to check. I can't see any caterpillars on them. That's like tempting fate, but at the moment they're fine. And then in the middle here is a big swathe of agastache. There is some wild mallow down there. These ferns are shuttlecock ferns, and when they first come up, their lovely curled fronds can be eaten. Haven't tried them yet, that's one for next year. But what I can see here are some spaces, and in that I'm going to sow some chop suey greens. And the three things left in my box that I could have sown here were pak choi, mizuna and the chop suey greens, and that's what I'm going for. And again, I'm broadcasting those, so I'm sprinkling them to allow them to grow wherever they want. I'll put a couple at the front, but not many, because I've got other young plants here, young seedlings growing up. The chop suey greens will be ready to harvest in around 6 weeks, and if we leave them to grow on, they will produce the most beautiful bright yellow flowers. The last 4 beds in this vegetable garden are metal raised beds along the back here. The first 2 have asparagus and borage in them, and the second 2 are not yet planted. This one is filled with logs at the bottom and masses of sheep's wool on the top. I need to put some compost on it and plant that up, so I will be able to get in a whole load more of these seeds for quick crops in here. As you can see, my garden is packed full of vegetables in amongst the flowers, and I really do use all of these vegetables as much as I can. If you'd like some ideas of how to use your excess zucchini, courgettes, summer squash, I got together with some other YouTube gardeners to give you some really good suggestions. I'll leave a link on screen and in the video description.